see you.
See that?
Hello, guys. Working.
Go on.
We're people are getting slow to trickle in this month, so we're going to take a few minutes before we get
No
started.
worries, no worries. I wanted to go find that always adventurous press room in the lobby.
Yes, I think the construction is done. I don't think you have to go up to the second floor anymore, so
Okay.
fingers crossed.
Cool.
My boss will be here in a minute because she texted me, so we'll see. So, most of you know that we are running a little slow this time. And anybody watching on the live stream, we're giving a few more minutes for people to trickle in, so hang tight, we'll be getting started soon. As I said, I usually try to get to at least 5 or 6 people before we get going because we basically always hit that, even on slow months. So,
This is dramatically less people than the last time.
I know. As I said, it can vary a great deal. I've had meetups that, as I said, like 5 people came, and then I think our all-time record we had 70 people. So it can be a good spread.
Probably depends on the topic, right?
It can. As I said, and I can't ever predict what will like fascinate more people. Like
Yeah.
yours to me is a crowd pleaser, compared to something like how does OAuth work? Which is a very nerdy programming thing to talk about. But as I said, I'm not all people. I can't always predict it.
Yes, it's tough to predict.
I guess I also double check nobody is lost out there because they get a big dinner banquet for them in the hall lobby. minutes and then we can go ahead and get started. You know, I'll listen to the talk and I'll be a recording. I want to hear it at least.
Okay.
But
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, if it's video recorded, then archived.
yeah. There will be recording. It won't be the best because it's from that angle. The sound audio quality could be better, but you know, there will be.
No, I like it. It's like far away from my face, so I don't have to think about it.
But yeah.
I don't really like cameras, as you can surmise.
Oh, you don't like cameras?
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Well, first of all, you gain like 10 pounds on them, or like 20 pounds.
Yeah, they don't
Something to
always.
think
They
about.
don't always flatter any of us as well as they could.
Do you want people in the live stream?
Do we know? Not really. As I said, this just seems to be a slow month. Which normally February, not a lot of other things are going on, so normally wouldn't have to worry about that. And as I said, you know, we had 20 RSVPs on the Meetup, so I can't ever predict these things.
Well, tomorrow is Valentine's Day.
That is true.
Yeah. I just remembered today.
I guess a lot of people, I mean, maybe some people were like, well, I'm already going out tomorrow night, so I don't want to go out 2 nights in a row. That could be it for some people.
Yeah.
But as I said, I know Arson needs to go back in the bathroom, and I know my boss is coming because she asked me where it is. So we'll see. As I said, I think I will give it till 10 after, and then we will go ahead and get started regardless of how many people here or aren't here.
Does EFF has an office in Austin?
I mean, so national EFF's offices are in San Francisco. We do not have a physical building. You know, this is kind of our meetup gathering space. We sometimes rent venues for events, but no, we do not have the kind of budget that would allow us to pay a monthly lease on even a very small space.
Yeah, makes sense.
We're mostly just a space for people with these interests, a community for people to gather and where we educate people. Like, you know, occasionally throw parties, occasionally do political rabble-rousing. It's a pretty big network of people. It just, as I said, how many of them actually come to the meetup in a given month? It's a mystery.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I've been rather, busy the last couple months, so I haven't had as much bandwidth as normal to drum up things myself, dealing with a new job, getting married in a couple months.
Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations. Wow, a lot of events.
Maybe. Waiting for EFF Austin? The meetup?
For which one?
The EFF Austin?
Yes.
Yeah, so you're in the right place.
Yeah.
We were waiting to get started. 'Cause
I was
it's being
upstairs, I was waiting
Oh,
upstairs.
did I put a wrong instruction somewhere? I thought it
Okay,
said
no,
first
because
floor.
Owen just sent me the
Oh.
information and said, okay, today there is an event here.
If Owen told you 16th, I don't know where he got that in his head. We've been down here for quite a while, so.
Because I got here at 6:30.
Oh, wow.
And I wasn't
Are there
ready.
other people? Are there other people out
No,
there?
there was nobody there,
Okay.
that's why I was surprised.
Okay.
And I texted him and said, hey,
Okay.
no.
Yeah, I don't know where he got that. in
And
his
there are
head.
chairs over there, so.
Well, there are
it was
meetups
like-
that happen up there sometimes. I don't know where he got that in his head. Yeah. Well, glad you found us. As I said, people were being slow to trickle in this month, so we were giving it a minute before we got started, so you haven't missed anything.
That's good.
We're almost at enough people that I'll say we can go ahead and get started. I'll give it 1 or 2 more minutes just because somebody's coming back to the restroom. Oh, here comes the long out to the restroom. Yep. There's somebody else. So, yeah, we're as I said, it's just a slow month. People are starting to filter in. Hey,
Nice to see you again.
See you again. Yeah, Kevin. Yeah. Yeah, good to see you again.
Hi.
Parastum. Yeah, nice seeing you. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't actually gotten quite started yet. It's being a slow month for people to trickle in. Here it comes. Everybody's coming at 10 after, so.
There's a good traffic.
Hard to find.
I make the instructions as explicit as I can.
I know, it's really very.
Hey, good to see you guys. We actually haven't started yet because people were being slow to filter in this month, so you haven't missed anything. So we'll be getting started in 2 seconds. Oh man, no, it's 7. Man, I swear, no matter how clear I think I'm being with the instructions. It's always.
into my head and then.
So anyway, yeah, we'll be getting, probably go ahead and get started here. We've had enough people filter in, we can go ahead and get going.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks for coming. It was a slow month, so you just doubled our numbers. All right. Let's see, and everything's still good on your end technically? Let me make sure the live stream is still looking good. So it's no longer projecting up there though. Oh, wait. Oh, there it is. There it is. We're good. Okay, we're good. All right. And actually, let me see how the contrast is looking on the live stream. I might dim the lights a bit just so the screen's more visible. So let's see. Yeah. What's up? I think you're allowed to do that, yeah. Ask the desk lady if she comes up. Yeah, sorry, we're gonna lower the lights just a teensy bit so that the live stream can see it better. Alright. Let's see that. Alright, change in 1 second. Ah, yes, that is substantially better. It's, still a bit hard to read, but better. Alright. Alrighty, let me pull it. Is your spiel? Alrighty. Stas, good to see you. I figured we might see you for this dog. Alright. Let's see here. All right, everyone. Slow start this month because I guess, we're all running late. Me too. So welcome, everyone, to the latest monthly installment of the EFF Austin Meetup. My name is Kevin Welch. I'm the current president of the board at EFF Austin. I see old and new faces. Welcome all, and welcome to those watching online. So if you're new to us and like who and what is EFF Austin, well, as you might gather from the name, we are an Austin-based digital civil liberties organization. We've been around for at this point, over 30 years. We work closely with Electronic Frontier Foundation, who are based out of San Francisco. They are the nation's oldest and largest digital civil liberties advocacy group. You can sort of think of them as the ACLU for the internet. They work to protect your rights in emerging technological spaces. Usually technology moves faster than sane law or policy. They especially work to try to safeguard your First and Fourth Amendment rights, basically your freedom of speech and expression and your implicit right to privacy under the Fourth Amendment. They work on issues like net neutrality, end-to-end encryption, protecting Section 230 of the CDA, fighting against bad laws in Congress like COSA, et cetera, and just generally trying to make your digital experience a good, safe environment where technology serves people and not the other way around. So as I said, we are almost as old as National EFF. We were both founded in the early 90s. I was not around then, though we do still have one board member from that era on the board. We are the oldest member of what EFF calls the EFA, or the Electronic Frontier Alliance. It is a peer-to-peer network of groups all throughout the United States, about 100 of them in total. None of us are formally legally affiliated, but we're all ideologically aligned with EFF, and while they work primarily at the federal level on legislation and sometimes at the state level in California, the other EFA groups usually advocate at city or state level on various issues. We are primarily an educational organization, mainly in the form of our meetups, of which you are here. They happen the second Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. here at Capital Factory, who graciously allows us to have our meetups here. And so that's the main thing we do. We will not be having our normal meetup in March because of South by Southwest. There's going to be a lot going on here, obviously. That being said, we are going to have a number of potential one-off events in March. For one thing, in March, we will be hosting March's edition of Nerd Night, which is an ongoing monthly speaker series here in Austin that's currently at Barrel of Fun in Mueller. They get speakers to come out and give little talks on various nerdy topics. So I, along with Dr. Sharon Strover and Dr. Molly Roy from UT, will each be giving some kind of fun talks on various topics. I will probably be explaining a quick primer on what Section 230 of the CDA is and why whatever you've heard from both Democrats and Republicans, it's a very good law and should not be messed with. Dr. Strover will be talking about her research on citizen attitudes to privacy in public spaces in Austin. And Dr. Molly Roy will actually be talking about her research on the intimate connection between surveillance as a technology and the theory of dance. So, if you're like, what? Then you should definitely check that one out. Let's see. We also are probably going to be co-presenting an event with Open Austin on March 9th for Open Data Day. We'll probably be having kind of a civic social gathering with them, so stay tuned for that. And then finally, our normal monthly meetups will resume in April and May, although April's is actually going to not be on the second Tuesday. The Capital Factory needed me to move the date on that one. It'll be either the third or fourth Tuesday. I can't remember. I'll update the stuff. One of our board members is going to give a presentation on what the hell passkeys are, a proposed replacement for passwords. And then finally, in May, we're actually going to have a virtual speaker, the host of a very popular digital security podcast, Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. Carrie Parker is going to be beaming in and talking to us specifically about computers and pseudo-random numbers. So that's a bunch of fun stuff coming up over the next several months. In addition to education, we also throw parties whenever cool, eccentric millionaires want to give us a little money. So if you know any, we can have another fun cyberpunk party, so do introduce me if you know any. We also, as I said, we do some civic advocacy both at the city and state level. I provided testimony on the last Texas ledge for HB4, the big omnibus data privacy bill. Basically, it was better than what we had, which was nothing, but I didn't think it went far enough, so I gave some recommendations that I hope will eventually be incorporated into the law. We also were intimately involved in discussions around the city's automated license plate reader policy. We successfully got them to drop the data retention period from 30 days to 7 days, which we were very proud of. And also, we're now currently in discussions with the city, both around issues related to telework policies and AI policies for city departments. So yeah, that's a bit about what we're up to, but we are an entirely volunteer-run organization. So basically, if you like what we're about and find these issues of interest, you should get involved. What we do is entirely by what the community wants us to do. So that is my spiel, and so without further ado, I will introduce our speaker for this month, and I will turn things over to her. So, our speaker this month is Antonina Semivolos. She worked as a Trusts and Estate Paralegal in a boutique New York City law firm and as an Electronic Discovery Paralegal for a large international law firm before attending Maurer School of Law. She later completed a dual degree in law and in Russian post-Soviet studies at Robert Byrnes Russian and East European Institute and an MA in Telecommunications at the Media School at Indiana University Bloomington. Her professional focus is the interrelation between personal data collection, lawmaking, and facial recognition technologies adoption in Russia and in the US. And in this talk, she's going to be talking to us about the administrative and legal techniques which the Russian government has utilized to commence the adoption of facial recognition and the construction of Moscow's smart city, while also targeting the erosion of the rule of law and that of civic society. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Antonia.
Thank you, Karen. I'm very honored to be here, and I would like to, of course, thank Kevin mostly because through him I actually found out about this venue, and it happened so that I've just published my work about which I'm going to be talking today, and he proposed that I give a talk. So it's first time I'm talking about it at this length because before I only spoke for like 15 minutes and was trying to kind of make it concise. So today I was wondering, since it takes about 1 hour to talk and have a discussion at the same time afterwards, please feel free to stop me if I'm running too fast, but I'll try to be slow. And I was thinking what to talk about. I didn't want to make it dry, and I was trying to avoid that while doing this PowerPoint. And I thought it's a good time to actually talk a little bit about give a hint of my biography about how I came to this point and why I'm why I care about facial recognition cameras and why I wanted to study them, specifically in Moscow and in Russia as a whole. So I basically have a background in law, as Kevin mentioned, but eventually I came to study anthropology. And there is this very interesting subject of legal anthropology, and it's interesting how in academia and at the Indiana University on campus, once you are taking professional courses like JD, which they are, alongside like business courses, for example, if you work towards MBA, it's a degree of profession. So you become lawyer, you go to court, you work with as many cases as possible. But basically, legal anthropology speaks about law as a subject. And I think this is something that was running throughout my study, looking at the law and how specifically laws dealing with personal data collection in Russia affect the installation of facial recognition cameras in Moscow. Because basically everything started in Russia, in Moscow. It's been always a very centralized country, even beginning with its roots in Soviet Union and even before Soviet Union in Russian Empire. And nothing has changed much since then in that extent of centralization and bureaucracy that is taking place in Moscow. That's why by studying Moscow, we actually study Russia as a whole. And everything begins in Moscow, really. So the result of this work, which I would say started about in February 2014, when I was doing ethnography in Moscow in one of the NGOs there, which was called Public Verdict. So it started back then in 2014, but it started in a very abstract way because I was looking at basically internet adaptation in Russia and how is it different from US. I was trying to compare, and I already at that point have gotten my JD in the American Law School at the Indiana University, and it was interesting to look at it through that prism of the professional degree obtained in the US, and also from the collection of courses I have taken. So my degree is basically that I took concurrently with JD was in area studies. And area studies is a very abstract term. It's basically compilation of courses dealing with literature, music of the region. And the region happened to be Russia and post-Soviet space as a whole. It could be also Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. My concentration happened to be Ukraine because I was born in Soviet Ukraine, and I was studying language policies at the time, and also Russia. And with this arsenal of anthropology coursework and JD obtained in US, I came to work for the NGO in Russia, and that was that was in February till April of 2014. And that was a very interesting time in Russia because it was time of annexation of Crimea and also revolution in Ukraine, which didn't start yet before I came there. So it was an interesting time to be there because I became a witness of many discussions in subways, just people talking about, sharing their opinions. And also amongst the community of NGOs and NGO leaders and lawyers who were working with protest culture in Russia. They were very diverging, of course, from people who were just, most population in Russia actually, and I'm not trying to simplify it, but according to some studies, 90% get their news from TV still. And some people are more critical, so they get the news from social media or collect from different other sources. But actually to go even back a little bit, when I was in law school, I happened to take a class on internet law, And our speaker was a prosecutor from Indianapolis who worked with crimes committed in the internet realm. And he mentioned at the time, it was spring semester 2010, that Facebook is working on developing a technology that would recognize faces. And all the people in classroom were shocked at that moment. That was spring 2010. They couldn't believe it. They were in disbelief that such a technology could exist and be allowed by the American government, and that you could tag people, recognize their faces, and basically they had problems. And then we had like a very long philosophical discussion about it. But that was 2010, and that was probably one of the first times when I even heard the concept of facial recognition technology and of computers trying to see, scientists working with computers to teach them see human faces and recognize human faces. And then fast forward in 2014, I found myself in Moscow, and my group with which I was working I was a fellow in an organization called Social Expertise Exchange, which was supported by the funds from ACLU and American Bar Association. Basically, I didn't really have any directives from my superiors. The only thing I had to do was to write midterm reports and then final report. And I could use my time as I pleased, really. But finding myself close to this NGO, who was they were watching basically what was happening with protests in Russia. And at the time, important case that happened was Bolotnaya Street case, which I believe took place around May 2013, and it was one of the biggest protests. And basically, this is where what was helpful for me to watch and to analyze everything that was happening was the coursework in anthropology, which dealt with participant observation and ethnography. And basically, participant observation is an approach in anthropology when you come to a culture that is different from your own, or maybe you can even do it with your own culture, but you kind of become part of whatever is happening without kind of being conscious of the boundaries at the same time. So you kind of become part of what's happening, but at the same time you're taking notes and analyzing what's happening and trying to understand what it is that's happening that people who are the native culture participants might not be even aware of. That's what's interesting. That was actually what attracted me in anthropology. And many people were actually also asking me, like, why do you want to study and do this coursework in the US if you were born in Soviet Union? And I kind of was surprised by that question, because it's one thing to be born and to be raised in one culture, but it's another thing is to go to another culture, especially something that is very different, like to be educated in Western school, and then come back to that culture. To some extent, not to come back because I was from Ukraine, but Moscow, I've heard of Moscow, and I knew that everything is connected to Moscow in Soviet Union, and then study it. So my group happened to be rule of law group in which basically professionals from the US, I was one of them. I was the only one, I think, who was in Moscow, but others were sent to other regions of Russia. We're studying the oversight of police. And I actually didn't really want to ask around what is exactly oversight of police. For me, it was new. But as I was attending many different meetings organized by civil society groups, I started realizing that basically they're raising problems of police acting in ways that are not open to the civil society or to protest, people who are participating in peaceful protest. What happened, and I went to a few of such protests in Russia, protests would happen somewhere in the center of Moscow usually. I haven't watched one in St. Petersburg, for example. They take place usually in squares, big squares that are kind of similar to piazzas in Italy, where people gather. And then police comes, and the name police is also interesting, the word police, because it used to be militia during Soviet times, but now it was changed to police, which is kind of more westernized term, and I was surprised by that too. But police would come with these special cars that are basically cells on wheels, and just like push people in, like haphazardly, without any order to it. So the problem would always be that the onlookers, people who are passing by, or journalists who are supposed, who are there because of their line of duty, are being taken to the police station. And what happens next, nobody knows really. But basically they are taken to the police station. Hopefully they get out because the space is limited, of course. Hopefully there is an official report written. Sometimes even reports are not written. And the problem is that the police officers are wearing uniforms and they're supposed to have their name tag on their uniform. But in most of these cases, they don't have name tags. So basically, if there is an administrative violation, which in most cases this is administrative violation for people who protest, the court or police basically writes an order by the court and summons them to the police station and says that you were at this protest and now you have to pay this fee. In most cases, it's very difficult to appeal, and a person is not even capable to present any evidence to say which officer treated them a certain way, because sometimes there is such thing as police violence, and it's a very well-known fact in Russia. And that's how I started realizing what police oversight is. These young organizations and the civil society groups are trying to make police force as transparent as possible. They are looking for ways how they can work together, which is kind of seems to be a very impossible undertaking. At least it seemed to me like that when I was watching what was happening. And I also was fortunate to go with my colleagues to a few court hearings and do court ethnography. And actually my first experience of court ethnography happened to be in Bloomington, which was the city where Indiana University is located, in a small courthouse, local courthouse. And so I had something to compare to how everything is taking place in Russia. And one interesting anecdote that I have is that it was another important trial having to do with Bolotnaya Street. It was one of the defendants who was supposed to have hearing, and it was a big Moscow courthouse. There are many courthouses within Moscow, like each region within Moscow has at least one courthouse, from what I understand. And but somehow when we came, press was outside. There are many rooms in the courthouse. They put us into the smallest room possible. And I couldn't understand why. And my colleague was not surprised. And I asked him, like, why is this the case? Like, why are they doing this? And he said, like, well, it's very simple. It's because they don't want press to come in. They basically want to have as few people as possible in the courtroom, like taking the translation of everything that's taking place. It was also interesting to compare how defendant is positioned in the courtroom as compared to the American one. Like when I was in the American one, basically people who are in jail at the time and are waiting to hear their sentence, they are sitting like on the side in the courtroom, like architecture, and separated by the tables. In Russia, the defendant was in a cell. It was like a huge cell. Very interesting, like visually speaking. The convoy, the officers who were in the courtroom, they had huge guns, like not little, like big one, as if it was like military. Very interesting presentation of power, like, and that's what I was appreciating about the experience, because like those nuances you kind of cannot even read about. Like once you are present there, you understand that this is very different presentation of the court system. And another day was another administrative hearing, and we were supposed to be witnesses. It was possible to enter and be witness to the hearing, but there was no explanation on the door. Basically, it was supposed to take place, let's say, at 3 p.m. 3 p.m., nothing is happening. We had to wait for like, a few hours for somebody to come in. So basically it was a sign, and again it was something that was very customary. Like my colleague was not surprised, and he said this is just, it's not transparent, like they just do whatever they want to do. Not to put it so simple, but the court system is not as transparent as what I was used to here in the US, for example, with my jury duty or when I was doing the court ethnography. So those were comparisons. And just to, and all this basically culminated in me coming back and obtaining my degrees eventually, and I had all these notes from my ethnography, And then eventually I came across articles by Kashmir Hill in New York Times, who is an investigative journalist who explores the topic of privacy and specifically lately topic of facial recognition and Clearview AI, which happens to be a big company here in the US that develops the facial recognition software in the US. And I was fascinated by those articles because I thought, she describes what's happening very, in a very exploratory manner that is not dry, very interesting to read, and she is definitely trying to meet people who are behind the scenes, and she describes how it's tough to meet these people, specifically the CEO of Clearview AI. She was trying to meet him for a very long time. Eventually he agreed. But I was curious about these articles because having come from Moscow, I realized that I need to narrow down my thinking about how do I compare privacy culture and just privacy perceptions in Russia to those in the US, to technologies that's very recent and interesting to me, and I'm really curious about how is this taking place in Russia. So that's how I came to the topic of this article that is based on all this experience that I've just accounted. And the article was eventually published in Cardozo Journal of Equal Rights and Social Justice, and you can access it. It's on their website under archives. It's free of charge, and
I'm not sure you know, but we are seeing the same page.
oh yes. So
Okay.
basically, I wanted to speak for 15 minutes about my biography and also.
Because you're referring to
Yes,
that.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Prologue, right?
Yeah, more slides to follow. And I also have my email here if anybody has questions about what I'm going to be talking about here today. Yeah, I have more and more words, so I didn't want to make them big, but it came out to be what it is. And I wanted to speak about my methods, about what it is I wanted to look at. So first of all, from the perspective of legal anthropology, I wanted to look at the personal data laws which do exist in Russia, and at civil cases, and just find whatever is possible to find about specifically facial recognition. Some of the cases, such as Popova and Milov, eventually were sent to the European Court of Human Rights because they could not find any appropriate response from Moscow courts. They kept saying the same thing. I'm going to zoom in on this case later on, but briefly speaking, basically Popova is an activist. Eventually she got her law degree as well, but she started solo petitioning by the Duma, Russian Duma, which is like Russian parliament building, and the police basically used her petition to fine her administratively for petitioning in front of Duma, and they used as evidence a photo of her face, exaggerated 35 times, but at the same time they were not openly saying that we are using facial recognition. But it was already evident that they are using this technology, but that's another problem with these cases in the court system. The police or law enforcement are not open about it. They're not saying that, yes, we are using the algorithm from this company. So then I also analyzed about 25 AI industry reports and governmental reports, mostly talking about the development of AI in US, China, and Russia. And one of such reports is the one that I was mostly focusing on, created by the Office of Mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, who has been the mayor of Moscow since 2010, and who once went to, or maybe many times, he went to Singapore, and he just was really inspired by how technologically advanced Singapore is. And right away he had this dream to make Moscow as technologically advanced and even more so than Singapore. And he's directing a lot of finances and a lot of effort into making creating Moscow a smart city. And this report, which is Moscow the Smart City 2030, is basically text strategy for Muscovites to explain to them what it is the city is trying to achieve. And one thing that stands out about this report, as many other official reports by the industry and by the government agencies, it's very rosy, it's very enthusiastic. He's quoting a lot of futurologists, many of them Western futurologists, and highlighting the positive sides of the technology. But there is no mention of possible data leaks or any kind of nefarious consequences of the technology uses. So there is no education of Muscovites about how their data can be actually lost. So that was something I looked at, and then also participant observation ethnography that I just mentioned that happened to deal with police oversight and directly is connected to the law enforcement uses of facial recognition. When I was in Moscow in 2014, there was no mention of facial recognition. But when I started doing my ethnographies, I was trying to reach out to people I met in 2014 to speak to them about facial recognition. And it was actually tough to get in touch with people because it was turbulent, and as it is right now, a turbulent time in Russia. And many of them did not get back to me. And I was surprised by that because I was friends with some of them. But I kind of understood that it might not be safe for them. And I reached out to them by Facebook or by email. And I couldn't really find people to speak with, even so I knew many people. They were saying that, like, I don't know anything about facial recognition, or I never worked with it, I never encountered. But then I met one person who was a journalist, who eventually actually introduced me with like snowball effect to a few lawyers in human rights organizations, and one government person who works in the government, and like a few journalists. And those were also my they became background qualitative interviews, because basically I was not in Russia. I was here in the US doing my research by reading all these documents and newspapers, but I wanted to make sure that my understanding is correct and to as much as possible. And it was important to interview them. And I also got one of them volunteered this very important document that I'm citing in this article. It's a complaint to the President of Russia, signed by about 17 lawyers from OVD Info organization, which basically describes themselves as an organization mostly composed of lawyers who help to protect political protest culture in Russia. So they're helping people who have been detained at the demonstrations. And that was an important document. It was about 7 pages, but basically they enumerate all the problems with the uses of facial recognition by the police force in Russia to the president, hoping that the president is going to look at this and come up with some orders that is going to limit powers of the police. And then also text analysis of about 100 newspapers, mostly in English, but some of them in Russian. And it was also interesting to notice this tendency that either kind of two categories of newspapers. Either they were very, again, enthusiastic about the advent of this technology and only talked about positive sides of it, or if they were quoting lawyers and the human rights NGO leaders, they were very dystopian and saying that nobody's thinking about privacy rights in this instance, and there has to be, like, people have to be educated about this. Mostly those two categories. And also a short overview of literature. Maybe you know some of these names, and specifically there are two kinds of like philosophical thought that technology is something that influences the society and changes society, and to some extent is kind of more powerful, takes over. And another thought is that by Philip Agar, saying that actually the institutions that have been formed long before the technology was adopted are the ones that affect how technology is being adopted. And David Nord also states that in his theory that organization and administration is even more important than the innovative technology itself. And the direct connection to law is right here in this statement, because administration is nothing but the uses of laws and policies that are in effect. and that are created or not created for whatever reason. So basically, I was looking in the case of Russia, how is it adaptation of this technology is happening here. And it was hard not to notice the idea of panopticon that came from Jeremy Bentham, who I didn't know, but actually got inspired by his brother Samuel Bentham, who at some point worked in St. Petersburg with Duke Potemkin on the army construction of some buildings. And basically, panopticon is this all-seeing eye structure, very utilitarian. Specifically, Bentham was talking about prison, with the guard being at the top and seeing everybody and everything that's going on below him, but those prisoners who are inside the prison never know at any moment of time if they are being watched or not, but this disciplines them, the fact that they might be seen by the guard, and they act accordingly. And that's connected to the idea of Michel Foucault lectures on governmentality, and directly connected to the idea of surveillance, how the government and, or in some countries maybe it's tech companies that create the technologies, are very privy to the resources and the technologies that basically make the population, as Foucault would say, transparent vis-a-vis the government that is becoming more and more secretive in how they are using these tools. And then another author, Shoshana Zuboff, more contemporary, who published a really great book on the age of surveillance in 2018, who mostly talks about market and the big tech companies, and she was working with machines and the role of machines in human society even before internet came and all these data collection tools that are available now via the internet. And basically it talks also about the idea of knowledge, just like Michel Foucault, and power, connection between knowledge and power. And she has many talks in Berlin and in the US that are on YouTube, in which she talks about the concept of democracy and surveillance, and also how that which is known about us is much greater than what we know about what is being done with our data and metadata that is being collected from the data, and the surplus of data that is being collected. And this is also very much shows up in the how the technology is being adopted in Moscow, the smart city. It's interesting because basically what has been throughout my study mentioned that Moscow is like an experimental lab, or how AI is basically being improved and tested in the real life scenarios. And this is something that the government in Russia encourages, and that's why tech companies have great power. But at the same time, if you have to think about the power of the government and the of the tech industry, it's hard not to notice that the industry is quite strictly regulated by the government, and it shows up in the case of facial recognition development company, Tech Lab, that is basically analog of Clearview AI in the US. I put these definitions in glossary, just a few of them, because I'm mentioning them throughout my talk. But basically, Clearview AI is the company that develops, the biggest company for the AI, for the facial recognition software development in the US. And Tech Lab became known in Russia around 2015. And it's interesting, I've been noticing, and it's hard not to notice some differences and similarities in how it's been happening in Russia and in the US. So in US, with Clearview AI, they developed the CEO found investors in New York City. At one point he was in California, but then he moved to New York City. Found some conservative investors. One of them gave him about $200,000 to start up his company and develop his algorithm. And then he, to test it, and basically he did it by scraping all the images from the website, which at that moment also wasn't clear. Is it legal? Is it illegal? It's been tested in courts right now, and it's legal. It was defined by the court case in 2022, I believe. And I think it was a case of LinkedIn against Clearview AI, saying that you cannot just take our data. But the question is much bigger than that, because it's not just data coming from LinkedIn, but also coming, their images of individuals. And from what I understand, the best law is BIPA in the state of Illinois that protects biometric data, and that's where ACLU sued Clearview AI. And so basically they had the software, and they gave it for free to a few police departments, and they were in the beginning saying that we are going to only work with law enforcement in the US. But then eventually it became clear that they were working with some private companies, and not just in the US but abroad as well, and some governments outside international community. And at that point, they started charging already. Like in the beginning, they were giving it for free, and then after trial period, when police departments realized that this is a great tool, even so it was flawed in many ways, but they were kept improving, and they're very proud to say now that they have over like 30 billion, I think, face prints now collected from Facebook that are in the open, Google, LinkedIn, Instagram. But this connection with the government is not clear yet. In the US, in Russia, Entech Lab around 2015 developed its algorithm, went for a few competitions outside. Competitions were mostly, I think, in the US. There is the Institute of Standardization of the technology where they won over Google, and overnight they became very famous in Russia, and the CEO of Entech Lab became famous because of them having won. And they were also boasting that they have the best algorithm, but I've heard this from Chinese companies, from American companies, so it's hard to say which one is the best. But basically what they did, they gave the software for free to people to use freely. Whenever a person had a cell phone, they could upload this software, and chances are they had profile on Russian analog of Facebook, which is called In Contact, Vkontakte in Russian. And whoever had that access to that, had a profile, could basically take a photo of a stranger anywhere in the street, and then upload it and have it in his phone or her phone, and with the help of this software, find the information about the stranger, like find their profiles online. Whether it's a In Contact profile or Instagram. Yeah, it was happening in 2016. And it happened, I don't know for even how long, it's hard to find for how long it was happening, because at some moment it was a preparation for FIFA games, which took place in Russia in 2018, not just in Moscow, but around the country. It closed down. This enterprise was closed down, hard to find exactly when, and Entech Lab started working exclusively with the government and private entities. But that's something, basically, the interesting point in all of this is something I'm mentioning in this article, is the artist from St. Petersburg, who, like everybody else, got this software. He was a 21-year-old artist. And he decided to use it in an artistic kind of way. He was taking photos of strangers in the subway, St. Petersburg subway, without them knowing that he's doing that. And then he found them online, and he could identify 70% out of 100% of people, and put a photo of their profile posing for the Facebook or for Vkontakte next to the one that he took in subway without them knowing it. And people were outraged. Most people were outraged, yes. And some people understood what he's doing. And they were like, yeah, we don't have privacy even in public spaces. And they kind of were grateful to him. And he himself in his interviews said that, I was trying to show people how ridiculously, they have no idea of how much they're losing by disposing of their information online, and by not knowing who might find it and how they can use it against them. And that was his artistic statement. And he himself is a very private person, so he's very careful about how he shares information. And but I guess it was eye-opening experience, and that was an online exhibit, so it was open for some time for people to view, and you can still find it online. And it's interesting to see those photos, with people posing and not posing. And he used this software in 2016, and at that point, basically. And Tech Lab, I guess, collected as much data as they could. They brought a lot of cameras for the FIFA games. It was at that time around 200,000 alone in Moscow of CCTV cameras with facial recognition. And the games were done, were finished, but the cameras stayed on, of course. Nobody took them away. And their numbers are growing. So the next point is the Department of Information Technologies. That's the department that regulates the installation of cameras around Moscow. And supposedly, and it's not clear, they have access to these images. But they also have a contract with MVD, which is a Ministry of Internal Affairs. That is basically a center of a police force. About how this data is to be used, but as many lawyers in Russia who are trying to understand what's happening say that nobody is privy to that contract, nobody had ever seen, so it's not transparent. And it was also important for me to look at the fact how President Putin is invested in the development of AI, and on multiple occasions he said to young people in schools and in universities that the nation that invests in AI and is the best at AI will become a ruler of the world. And he said it in about 2017. And then eventually in 2019, the Russian AI Alliance was organized. And that's the government agency. And this industry has a lot of government backing. Like 12.5% is Rostec, 25% is the fund of one billionaire, Berdinyan, he has Armenian last name. And then the rest, which is about 50%, belongs to the 5 developers of Tech Lab. But they are closely regulated by the government. And then I also will mention this case of Milova and Popova, because that was the first case in Russia, and I believe it still is, that basically after going through all the courts, Tverskoy court in Moscow, Savelovsky court in Moscow, and then Moscow City Court, and getting the same judgments from the justices about the violation of privacy in public spaces, they decided eventually to bring it to the European Court of Human Rights. And their attorney at that time was Kirill Karateev, who is an attorney in Agora International Association. It's an NGO. But the thing is about this, it doesn't really matter anymore, because Russia is no longer with the Convention of Human Rights. It's signed out, I think, in 2022. And specifically, President Putin issued an order stating that the courts within the territory of Russia, their judgments take precedence over anything that takes place in Geneva. So it doesn't really matter as much as they were aspiring to resolve this issue. And also he noted, Kirill Karateev, that this was the first case of uses of facial recognition on a mass level in peaceful protest brought to the court, human rights court in Europe. So it's interesting for that reason too. So it's important to remember about administrative side of things and law in all of this, and think about agendas, agendas of government, agendas of the industry, which is very connected with that of government in Russia, and how they present it to people to make them believe that this technology is just indispensable, and they're doing it quite well, because I was a witness to one person from who happens to live in the US, calling their friend in Moscow and saying that the person, like referring to me, is studying here about your perception of facial recognition cameras, like what do you think about it? And this one specific person said, like, it's great, they keep us safe, and that's what the government wants you in Moscow to believe. And there is a truth in that, but that's not the only truth. And this is something that they, again, no different from West. Security and safety, resolution of crimes in much faster, much sooner by police than if you did not have camera. And that's an excuse they actually have. They have all those cameras in the center of the city, for example. They say to catch criminals unrelated to protest. And that's what they say officially in all the newspapers. And then there is Moscow leaders, officials who always say that it's to protect the protesters and to find criminals. And people believe them, I guess, because they keep saying it for a few years now. They keep saying it. And AI industry, same thing. They stress that privacy and confidentiality are the cornerstone of their operations. And they also say how much they invest for the into the improvement of the technology. But at the same time, cases exist now where people can get their personal information on black market. There was this one interesting case by Anna Kuznetsova, who also went to Roskomsvoboda, one of these rule of law organizations, to lawyers there, and said that she was able to buy her information about her her movements in Moscow within like 5-6 days on black market. So it's been leaked, and for like $260, so quite cheap actually. And she sued, I believe, the MVD and this Department of Informational Technology, and turned out that it was policemen who were trading that information, because they're one of, not few people, quite few people have access actually from executive branch also. But they had access to that information, they were selling it on the black market. And the positive development is that the judge punished them. There were damages they had to pay, and that was kind of a good example for others not to do something like that. But those cases are already happening, and they're not highlighted by the officials. They're kind of kept very quiet. I've also, as I was working with these cases, names of same attorneys are coming. Like Karateev, Seleznov, Darvinyan, Ganudinov, they're all from these organizations working in Moscow. I think there are like fewer than 10 of them, so not that many. And there are many talks by them on YouTube, in Russian mostly. I don't think there is any translation so far yet, but they're very informative. Their concern is that the proliferation of this technology might have started at the beginning of 2000. The clear signs of it they could see around 2015, even before FIFA games were there. But it was all very clandestine and nobody knew about it. Nobody acknowledged it in court cases that law enforcement is using this technology. They kind of had to always figure it out and try to prove it. And even then they were saying like, no, we just know these people, or we just have access to their Facebook accounts. So it was even hard to prove. They say that unlike in Georgia, for example, there is an Office of Personal Data that is impartial agency that is not connected to government or industry, that at least tries to regulate impartially the use of what's happening with personal data and how this technology is being used. But there is no such agency in Russia. There was a council that was supposed to be established with the presidential order back in like 2021, but it's still not there. So there were aspirations to have such agency, but so far they don't know of such agency. And here in 3 short parts, I'll just summarize what I thought was important in comprehension of what is taking place in Russia. And I really like this quote by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes about how law is a one big anthropological document, and something that inspired me for this study too. And it's important to notice the roots of the facial recognition technology that take place in the US in 1960s. And I don't know, some scholars who study the technology say it's very hard, it's very difficult to define who was the founder. It seems like it was enterprise by many scholars at the same time, but one name that always comes up is that of Dr. Woodrow Wilson Bledsoe, who basically got a PhD in Berkeley and at some point worked for government. And it's hard to find anything about him because most of his work was not published. It's understandable why, because he was working mostly maybe for CIA or for Department of Defense. Yeah, Department of Defense, so he could not publicize it. Meanwhile, his contemporaries...
Fun fact, everyone, he worked at UT Austin. He was part
yes,
of the
and that's something I discovered. That's something I discovered when I moved to Austin.
Just saying.
He was teaching there, yes.
Is he going to work with us now?
He's 95,
He may
so
be.
if he's here in a different sense.
Yeah, he may be, yeah. I believe it. And, but the thing is, like, there is a compilation of all his, like, these, like, prototypes of facial recognition, facial geography, photos of faces. He would start with sets of 10 faces, trying to teach computer to recognize faces. So it was like very rudimentary, and but at the same time it was a huge breakthrough in science because he was trying to teach computer to see patterns. So it was pattern recognition, but with faces he had more difficulty, but he was becoming more and more successful, and some of his contemporaries actually called him a founder, one of the very first founders of AI, when nobody even talked about AI at that moment. And to me it was new, but I mean, it might be very clear and obvious to like many of you that basically AI, the direct definition is the personal data collection, and the fact that they did not have access to as much data as all these companies do now kind of makes the companies that are contemporary now make it sound like they've invented something, and this is something like breakthrough, and it's something that has not existed 50 years ago. But as I was reading more about this, it actually existed starting in the 1960s, but they did not have internet to collect so much personal data and photos of faces specifically.
They didn't have GPUs either.
Huh?
They didn't have GPUs either.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was very, very limited, but still, with what they had, they've done like major work, basically. And now it's kind of forgotten to some extent. And the interesting here connection with the Russian case is that they were doing this in special labs, special designated places, many times with shots collected from the police stations, trying to identify criminals. In Russia, it was all happening right there in the city, with this NTech lab, you know, city being as experimental ground, and the government allowing this to happen and maybe directing it in some ways, because the more data, the better. And the interesting thing is also that Putin is very careful about what software or hardware he uses. He does not use Chinese anything at all. Yeah, nothing. But I was actually, to my chagrin, I found out that you know, mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, they're using software from Chinese companies for facial recognition cameras. And some you know, countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, quite often is Chinese. Putin is very strict about it. And also
only
about
homegrown Russian.
yes, only that. Yes, and also they are very proud. Many of them say that you know, it's developing at a very high speed because of the mass education. Mathematics is like really at a great level in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Plus investment and having to do with the exchange rates being very low. That's what Vision Labs CEO said once, that Russia is actually might be ahead of many countries within a few years. And they definitely caught up with the US and China based on all these reports that I read. So and even in times of Dr. Bledsoe, it was clear that there are certain biases because most of them were built on the faces of white men. And also this, like, you know, blind trust in the power of government. And the two pieces that I found about his life were an article in Wired magazine and the author of the Sean Raviv. He describes how his son, Bledsoe, when he was about 76 years old, he had some serious disease. He asked his son to burn contents of his safe in the garage. He had a secret safe. So supposedly that might be some pieces of facial recognition history in there, that he did not want to go out, he did not want to become owned by anybody. Because at some point, probably, like actually Banham too, became kind of whatever the inspiration was in the beginning of their quest for like utilitarian form of government with the panopticon or with these facial recognition cameras, you know, recognizing people. They realized that this is a very, very powerful tool. And one of the reasons actually Facebook and Google didn't go forward with it was because of ethical reasons. And that's something I found out from a book by Kashmir Hill. She recently published the book, Your Face Belongs to Us. And you know, Clearview AI comes to the forefront of facial recognition in the US, but actually Facebook and Google, they were, or possibly Microsoft, they were working with it even before Clearview AI. So one of the, as I was mentioning before, the biggest concerns in Russia is that the technology has been proliferating since about 2015, maybe even 2001, 2002, because they are finding some documentation that it's possible. The first cameras were black and white with very bad quality of video recording. They did not have facial recognition yet, but there was a system set up, a system called the Safe City in Moscow in 2015, which preceded Smart City. And that's when one of the, Damir Ganuditov was talking about it, the positioning of cameras. It's very difficult to understand why certain cameras are in certain places, but he said there are a few types of cameras, and municipal buildings have to have at least 4 cameras on each corner of the building. Then there are cameras on the streets. There are cameras in kindergartens and in schools with a system called Orwell, which is very ironic. Orwell. The name is Orwell. Yeah. And
they got lazy.
Yeah. No, I think they were just trying to be funny or something. I don't know.
I mean, it is kind of funny.
I don't know. But the cameras with higher resolutions are at the top of the buildings by the squares where most protest activity takes place. And it was also shown that most crime happens on the periphery of the city, periphery of Moscow, but most cameras are in the center. Also, according to some studies, about 5% is used for crime detection. How the 95% of them is used, nobody knows.
Right.
There was a study by Serebrennikov, who is a Russian scholar who was presenting in Helsinki, in the University of Helsinki, I believe. He was studying the urban security system in St. Petersburg and regions, in the region of St. Petersburg, about like 7 cities around St. Petersburg. And he was trying to find who makes decisions about installation of cameras, and especially their connections to the police, and it was very tough for him. So he also did participant observation, but he did a real-time participant observation in municipal offices, and transportation offices also sometimes are some of the agencies that install those cameras. But it's the concern, so one of the main concerns is there is no oversight, but at the same time the government is quite proactive in how they are installing these cameras, what laws they are creating, and how they are adjudicating, how judiciary is adjudicating these laws. So, for example, there are personal data laws. The mention of privacy and the secret and the right for family secret is in the Russian Constitution, and also there is so
Really?
no, the irony is there. They are there, but what is interesting, the Popova and Milov decisions, the judges don't even look at these laws. They don't use them because they say that being in public space automatically you have to be ready to the fact that your face is not private and your whereabouts are not private. So they don't even look, and that was a problem Popova and Lvov had with these decisions, because they realized that they are always it's a dead end, and they knew it also. So it's interesting how they are applying laws.
But how is it logically possible, the very expression that you used earlier, privacy in public places? It sounds a bit weird in English. It's either one or the other.
Right. It sounds like
Privacy in public spaces. Yeah, it's interesting I used it, but there is one thing, you're in public space without 200,000 facial recognition cameras, and there is another space, public space, where those cameras are not present, like was the case, for example, before 2000 in Moscow. Video cameras were not there. So you were anonymous if you were in the crowd. You were anonymous, more or less.
4 years that you weren't tracked.
But with cameras like that identify you and that can identify your social network profiles, find out how old you are, where you live, where you work, so that police can come in any of those places.
So it
has to be redefined.
I didn't want to derail the conversation. Please.
No, thank you, because that's how academics in Russia also think. You know, some of them say like, yes, we completely support what the courts are deciding, and others say, no, wait a second, they are using outdated notions of privacy when the cameras were not present. But now there is this technology that is new. And also the lawyer, one of the first lawyers for Clearview AI, his last name is Tor, I think. He's like very controversial, but he basically said there is no such thing as your face being private. There is no law in common law. Nobody said your face is private. It's the most public part of the body that you have.
Yeah, but the information that is related to the face.
Yeah, it's identification. Yeah, it's everything else. And actually, I'm thinking like, yes, I mean, it does have value what he's saying. Yes, some people will use that argument and win in court. But then, like, if face is not private, then like, what is private?
That's the continuation of technology that
Face is
continues.
not private, but it's definition.
There's a new way to track.
Because it's public, it's always open, and he juxtaposes it with your sexuality, or like you're not gonna go most cases naked into the public, so you're gonna cover yourself off. But your face is going to be open unless you close it.
In the US, it is called reasonable expectation of privacy, and this is when we are talking about reporting the calls or wiretapping laws, for example. If you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy, then I'm sorry. In a public space, you don't. When you're talking on the phone on the other person, you don't, because the other person may be recording you, and they're absolutely in the right to do that in the state of Texas.
Yeah,
that's true.
Although I will point out just a sidebar, I don't want to derail things, I'll just say that, a lot of times it's like, it's a situation can be fine, but then technology can change the scale of it to where we have to question whether the original assumptions were correct. Like, a good example would be a car in public, its license plate is public, it is visible, and in the past there was nothing preventing anyone, including a police officer, from writing that number down. But it's very different when suddenly you have machines that can write down everybody's license plate for any reason,
But access all
everywhere.
the information is tied to that license plate, therein lies the difference.
So it's all can scale, like a glass of water is not deadly, a tidal wave is.
yeah. Yeah, but thank you so much for that comment. It's interesting how these arguments are shaping in the US and in Russia at the same time. So in Russia it's like whatever the state says, and judiciary is completely dependent on the executive branch. And
this is a perfect example, and sorry to derail it again, when we have the emotional reaction that, hey, that's my face, stop, don't put it on the cover of the Time magazine, because I didn't allow that. When we're not in control of what we think is ours, but when we're trying to take it to the judicial and make a law out of that, we're immediately taking it to the extreme, and it becomes absurd. Like, yeah, privacy in public spaces, like, really? You cannot make a law out of that, because the law has to be logical. And that argument is 100% emotional. It's absolutely understandable, but it's any law based on that is going to be unenforceable because there is no clear definition of.
But isn't it the
Well-
law about what's attached to the face? Isn't
Yeah.
only that information is attached to the face?
And I'll also
Right.
say that this technology blurs what is a public and private space.
Right.
If these cameras are positioned such that you live in an apartment building and they put one in a public space that is aimed at your window, your private space is not private anymore.
The concept of reasonable expectation of privacy, hence you can go and keep the camera with a stick.
Well, except many people, apartment tenants are in the situation I just described and no, they can't get any city to remove the cameras. And this happens in the US as well.
I mean, if we think this is
Oh,
going
that's-
to be here, we're like hiring criminals.
Not to mention the fact that you started your speech with the fact that the protesters in Moscow are packed by the police in those shoe boxes on wheels, and nobody does anything. So the root cause is right there. We're barking in the wrong tree.
No, you see, the thing is, people do. Civil society does something, and actually, to some extent, to me, it seemed like it's futile. And I actually asked my colleague, and I said, like, why would you protest if you know what the ending of this is? And he answered to me with a question. And it was a very naive question coming from me, actually, but it was something I experienced first time myself. And he said, like, so you think we shouldn't protest? So he answered with a question to me, and I'm like, I don't know. I didn't say, oh yes or no, but I'm like. It's very conflicting. It's very conflicting. But actually, to respond also to your point, is that the case of Popova, Milov and Popova, they used Semivolos case in European Court of Human Rights. That basically in UK, I believe it took place. No, it was in Russia. But basically, the court said that the individual does have to have a certain expectation of privacy even in the public space. Like you cannot be just.
Because in Russia they don't have the presidential law. The president in Russia.
It's a civil courts, yeah.
They have totally different laws.
Well,
Yeah,
right, yeah,
they don't-
it's civil law, like
Judiciary,
just the continental
basically.
Europe, it's not common law like
Right.
British countries.
Yeah, it is different in that way. But the academics who spoke about it, they either say in Russia, and it's great that the academics in Russia are talking about it too. They have discourse, they published, works, and some say like, oh, we agree with court decision. Of course, there is a disclaimer. Now you are by a state Duma. Your photos of your face are going to be taken. It's what they do with it. Now because of how much information you can find on the internet about a certain person, like including where they live, who they associate with, have they ever gone to such protests in the past, and then collect the whole dossier, and then it's kind of a bit very Kafkaesque, I would say, like the good word that comes across, because...
And yeah, the quote from the trial right there.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to put it there, yes, because I remember this phrase, that's what basically happens with these post factum detentions, which these lawyers are enumerating in this paper that I mentioned, the document, the complaint they addressed to President Putin. And what happens, a person can go to protest, or they might be even bypasser, or they might be a journalist, and then days later, or weeks later, or months later, a police comes to their doorstep at home, or to their workplace, or to where they study in the university, or they stop them at the entry to the subway station.
And I'll actually just flag, because it is relevant to some of our work and what even goes on here in Austin, when we had debates with the police about automated license plate readers, one argument that they explicitly made of why they wanted to retain data so long is they wanted the ability to literally go into the past and find crimes in retrospect, basically. Like, they were not subtle that this is exactly what they wanted and why they wanted the data for so long.
Parties and whatnot, affiliations.
Yes, and just this idea of post factum detentions, which comes from the attorneys who work with these people who were detained. They enumerated everything that is wrong with them, and basically it's very haphazard nature. The police can basically get anybody. They are not clear about why they are taking specific people in their report. They say like, oh, we just know this person, we happen to know them, or we know their social media profile. So they're not saying like, we are using facial recognition to identify who that is, and we have a dossier on them. So it's like much more secretive than that. They also can write this report at any point in time. Right away, right after the arrest or like weeks after arrest, which basically makes it very capricious in nature. They can put anything they want in that report, and it's very hard to appeal that for people who are being summoned to come to the police station and later to the court. And all these are administrative decisions. And these attorneys are quoting a law, and I'm not mentioning any names of the laws because they are very long. In my article, they are in the footnotes mostly. But there are laws that I'm referring to, and these lawyers are saying that there is a violation of this certain law. The facial recognition camera and video recording should not be used because this is the crime is not that severe. It's administrative hearing. This is like first time the video recording is being used in this type of proceeding, and they are enumerating these problems to President Putin, so that he is one of the people actually in Russia who can affect the application of personal data laws. That's why they're writing it to him. And there was another report to him, but by a governmental agency that overlooks digital rights that is connected to the government. And they mostly addressed problems of data leakages in the internet, how like internet service providers might steal your data, but they said there was no mention of the law enforcement uses of the facial recognition, which is also not surprising. And also an interesting thing about the case of Russia is how this data is being centralized right now. There was a single data storage unit center, it's called. It has different acronyms that when you're translating it can be different, but it's the only one where they're basically conglomerating all this data from different sources. For example, there is a website called Active Citizen, and it gives an impression, of course, to Moscovites that they can affect city decisions, mayor office decisions about the life of their city, that they can be very proactive, like medical services, educational systems. It's all being right now aggregated in one center, which of course sounds very utilitarian and probably works really great for the government, for the state, but then if you think about also ramifications of that, and that the data leakages will be even more severe because basically all the information that is possible to accumulate about one individual is stored in one place. And it's something interesting because I heard the mention of electronic passport when I was in Moscow in 2014. I went to this meeting, and one official from Estonia was talking. And Estonia is a very interesting country in the history of internet because it was one of the first small countries where they started doing everything on internet very, very fast. Medical services, shopping, it was not even present anywhere else in the world. So it was interesting to hear, what he is saying about internet. And I'm kind of going back and forth between internet and facial recognition because to some extent they are connected. Facial recognition and AI development would be impossible without the collection of data that is happening with the internet, and that's why one technology preceded also another. And basically they were very proud to say that, oh, very soon we're going to have electronic passports, and very soon, like kids in schools, there's going to be different categories. Some will be like more smart, some will be not so smart. So basically there's this kind of categorization. And that was kind of unofficial talk, but it's all based on data. It's all based on history. I don't know what else is based on. To me, it kind of sounded, of course, very dystopian. But now when I was reading some works by these attorneys who work with facial recognition in Russia, and they were talking specifically about the laws that are being right now coded in Russian parliament. And they're talking about specifically one law that is supposed to go through multiple readings and reductions, and it's supposed to be edited by multiple legislators. But this specific law having to do with biometrics has become like 5 times larger than it was in the beginning. And they say this is anomaly. And the part that was added to the law had to do with terrorism, which doesn't make any sense. So in one law, the government combines terrorism and biometrics. And they're saying, they're talking about possible problems with this, that it's going to be very difficult law to interpret, and they don't understand what the legislators are trying to achieve here. And one of them is saying, I think the government is basically becoming very clear about the fact that it is going to be a monopoly, biometric monopoly, basically owned by the government, and they're going to have power over it. And if you're going to be coined the terrorist, which is a very broad category in Russia, like anybody can end up in that category, pretty much. Human rights activists, somebody who like was trying to bomb like a building or I don't know, and basically that you're going to be found with the help of your biometrics. But it's all between the lines. It's not direct. But they're just trying to comprehend what does this law mean. So on one side, yes, you can say, and like I hear lawyers say it very often here in the US, that the law is lagging behind the technology. Technology is so advanced, but the law is lagging. But basically, in Russian case, it's about what law does and what law doesn't do, like what law it protects and what law doesn't protect. And this is directly connected to also to the book by Shoshana Zuboff, Knowledge and Power. And the Russian government, if you would have to succinctly summarize it, knows a lot about citizens. Because of how much data they're collecting. And Zuboff points out that it cannot be just data of one kind. It can be various aspects of data. Not just about what you buy, but where you buy it, at what times you buy it, do you buy it by yourself, or you buy it with somebody else. All that is being collected into one center right now, and gives a great power to those who possess it. And I already spoke about the administrative detentions and post factum nature. It's mostly concerning to lawyers because even onlookers who stand at the demonstrations, it has an effect of psychological repression and also dampening the protest, because nobody at any moment knows if they're going to be detained or not. And also the police does not discriminate who they are taking in. So it does have an effect of fear for those who are present, and dampening effect, as they say. So some of the conclusions, many people stated that Internet of Things and smart city might lead to democratization, or will lead to democratization of cities and countries, but also what's taking place is that how the technology is being used, and that's a direct connection to Agre and Pol Nord with administrative organizations and agencies that administer the law, make the law, how it's been implemented by the judiciary, affect the users. And affect how society reacts to technology also. For example, there was a study by one Russian student, and her thesis, she explored whether the Russians accept facial recognition cameras. And she found that those that watch predominantly TV to get their news are pro-facial recognition technology. And even now in Russia, about 90%, according to some statistics, people gather their news from government-sponsored, mostly government-sponsored television programs. Some programs like program Rain were closed down. Independent media that's one of the things that during the Putin's rule, is that media outlets have been tightened, independent media, and closed down. Very big NGO, Memorial International, that was established, I think, in 1989, was closed down by the Supreme Court order. And many of the NGOs in Russia are labeled foreign agent. And if I read, for example, about something on Facebook by Roscom Svoboda, which I was quoting in my study, they have to put at the beginning of the article, this information is presented by the foreign agent. So NGOs who analyze what's happening and who are not liked by the regime have to put those in the beginning of whatever it is they're gonna say. And also facial recognition is like, I would say even like one of the most important elements of the infrastructure of smart city because it's a very big part of surveillance that is taking place. It's also interesting, I've been watching a lot of Russian detective shows, how in all of them, almost all of them, there is a mention at least once or twice or 3 times of system of facial recognition and how they find criminals with like running the footage from the cameras. They always go to the building because there are cameras at the building entrances that recognize people who live and who are guests. And they always run that footage. But then again, if somebody wants to let go of that footage, it will not be available. So it's possible. It's possible. But it's it's mentioned in many shows, and which makes it kind of normal. This is where we are now. We have surveillance, and it's good because it's protecting and helps police find criminals. Which is of course, there is truth in that too. I guess.
With all due respect,
Yeah.
it's not the technology, it's the autocratic tendencies that are making problems. The technology itself is just a technology.
It's just a tool.
It's a tool.
It's a tool.
Right, yeah.
And
because-
it depends on
and
whose hands it ends up.
Yet challenging those things, I mean, we were challenging them all right on Maidan in 2004, literally raining stones and fire on the police, and that pushed them back a little bit, and then we had to repeat in 2014. And that helped. Everything else, like pushing them in the court, no, because they literally control the courts, and that's pretty much what you say. They control the court, so you are fighting with them on their territory by their rules, and complaining you're not winning, but that's impossible by definition. This is how it is structured. So I don't quite understand.
I know, it's nothing new.
Well,
It's
Yeah.
communism 2.0 with cameras.
I mean,
That's just what they're used to.
Dot communism.
Thank you.
I mean-
It's like they're used
I
to
mean,
being
what
surveilled.
I would still say, you know, and my thoughts on that, of course, I want to hear what Antonina has to say, that just like, well, you know, yes, obviously the system is corrupt and fraudulent, but from what I also heard in this lecture, many ordinary Russian citizens believe it is not corrupt, that it is legit. So there is still a point in trying to convince those people who do not think it's a Cambridge report that it is.
Well,
Well, the interesting thing that happens, I'm making a connection to what I'm actually leaning towards. So people understand that fighting with the government is kind of sucks. They're gonna lose. So let's fight with the technology. And that connection in the head of many people is something that I'm not saying that you're doing that, but that many people, yeah, let's regulate AI. Are you nuts? Like,
Well, I
seriously.
think I will say, what I'll certainly agree with you is many of the AI proposals, you know, you have to understand how a technology works if you want to effectively regulate it. And many of the proposals I see about AI are just based from a place of complete lack of understanding about the tech and realistically how you could regulate it. Like the city straight up asked me, like, couldn't we, like, you know, as far as deep fakes, fooling people, couldn't we just pass a law banning deep fakes? And like, even if you did that, it's too easy to proliferate. Like, that's not
That's
that's
just because technology outpaces any
The summer's
law.
colder and winter's warmer, not to mention.
But, I mean, as a society, they know what communism surveils and what they're going after. It
Well,
doesn't matter what technology it is, they should be deep rooted in
Mhm.
with how they're being tracked.
Yeah,
I
it's.
mean, we're benefiting from all that technology. I mean, how many people are taking the phone and unlocking them in the face?
That's
and say,
exactly
Well,
right. So we don't think
absolutely.
it's happening here.
But I mean,
which
it should be,
foolish, but-
there should be no surprise that that's a smart
Yeah,
city
yeah.
is not so smart. I mean, it's like, it's what it is.
Yeah,
It's not a smart city, it's surveillance on your behaviors.
How do you package it?
It's,
Um,
that's Russia in a nutshell.
I know that Russia is.
I mean, I live there, I know, it's like, they're not fooling anybody.
Yeah, but it's not specific to Russia. I mean, those things are gonna be the.
Totally, it's not
It's
specific,
here,
it's
it's
everywhere, but I'm saying
Absolutely.
like, smart city in Russia is like, is comical.
Actually, there are.
I'm sorry.
In terms of
No,
broadband
no offense
access.
to you, I'm just saying, it's like,
No,
Well, I think that's the whole point of the research. you know.
exactly, it's like, you can't have a smart city in Russia because.
They're way ahead of time in terms of banking industry and how convenient the payments can be processed.
Yeah,
You got Putin, you got Putin there. If you have Putin, you got nothing. So,
So-
There is a face pay system now, face pay set up. It was in October 2020, and the Moscow officials said that it's so great. Now you don't have to get your smartphone, you don't have to get your card. You just put your face next to the camera,
they got more
and that's
information on
it.
you. They got more information on you.
And for
We
some
can
people
track
that
you
works.
further.
And this,
Right.
Yeah,
and
convenience
that's why there are
trumps
customs
everything else.
in the airports.
That's true, that's so true,
Totally.
exactly.
We're learning from Russia, which ain't smart.
And then we're enacting it.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So I'm reading that of the 180 countries in the world, Russia recently has been ranked as being either maybe the 135th worst or maybe the 141st worst in terms of perceptions of corruption.
They're also near the bottom on internet freedom of the annual reports. I mean, China's even worse. A few countries are even worse, but Russia's near the bottom. Yes.
So my question is, does the corruption, or at least perception of the corruption of judges and judiciary track that? Do you think that the Russian judges and judiciary are about that corrupt, or maybe a little bit less so because there's people that are holding out for civil society?
You know, it's
Are
like,
there good actors who are limited by all the
it's a
bad
big,
actors?
yeah, it's a very like deep question, and it's like hard to like answer it, not simplifying it. But basically, actually, there was one work that I came across in which I think Western sociologist was studying court system in Russia, and it's basically very dependent on executive branch, and the rule of law is kind of like absent. That's why I wanted to put like in my title rule of law. And I was like thinking also like what is rule of law? It's how law is being used. So law is there, like personal data laws are there to be used, but it's about how they're being utilized, like how they are being adjudicated, and do actually people have protections of these laws, or they don't?
Is it in legal education, is this corruption acknowledged, and is it part of the legal education?
Depends which university you go to. So, for example, I went to the talk in a higher school of economics, which is supposed to be like progressive and liberal. But then again, people who work there, professors, they don't want to lose their position. Like they're going to be very careful about how they express their opinions. And also, one thing I want to add about the fact of like this surveillance. That when they interviewed Russians, like just on the street, Levada Center, I think, in Russia, there are organizations who really want to find out what do really like Russians think about, average Russians. Most of them about the surveillance, they said like, oh, there is no surprise, surveillance, like it's been there forever, in Soviet Union it's been there forever. I have nothing to hide. Which is like not that different from the book that was published by Daniel Solov. In the title he has, nothing, I have nothing to hide. People in the West saying the same thing. Like, I have nothing to hide. So, like, of course, if they're like, screening my actions and they know everything that I'm writing in my personal messages, I don't care about it because I have nothing to hide. Until
I got
you
stuff to
care.
hide.
No, but the interesting thing is when sociologists look at this, they speak to these people and then they say, oh, if you have nothing to hide, can you just show me the contents of your wallet? And most people will say no.
I mean,
not
yeah,
going to show you my wallet.
I mean, yeah, it's like tell me your bank account, you know, you have nothing to
But they
hide.
say at the same time, I have nothing to hide.
I don't understand like with the history, what they've been brought up in, and the secrecy and the don't make eye contact. and
Informants, the culture of
the
informants.
whole culture of that, it's like, it's amazing that they would indulge anything.
Yeah, but it's interesting that it has a, every action has a reaction. It also kind of, produces in culture people who are so fed up with the system that they find all kinds of ways to to go around it. And there were expressions like, this is not a phone conversation, meaning I don't want to talk to you on the phone because of course somebody else is listening. Or like the wolves have ears, so like let's go and talk in the park. Everybody knows it.
Or they're old school people that say we must conform, and so I'll do whatever they say.
Yeah.
I would think that the younger
As long
people
as-
would be.
Yeah, and then there was this culture of informants too, like, people living in communal apartments where, like, if
Oh,
you
yeah.
places and then they're like write donose, or like write to the police, like, if
Yes.
they don't like something about their neighbor, they say like, I don't like how this portrait of Stalin is hanging. It's like a little bit cruel, and the police can come.
That's
Yeah.
the minimum, like.
Those were
And to your point about like, are there law schools that quote unquote teach the truth or not, it reminds me of an interesting anecdote that I can't remember where I read this. It might have been 10 years ago in some Cory Doctorow blog post, but I read somewhere that at least at some point in China, there was a very interesting phenomenon where it was like they had banned e-books of Orwell's 1984, but they hadn't banned print books of it. And the logic was that they were fine with it being in print because the very kind of person who would seek it out in a physical copy in a bookstore versus digitally was a member of the cultural elite. And you're allowed to be somewhat educated even on bad thought if you're part of the cultural elite because, well, you can't function at the level they need you to for your country if you're not allowed a certain breadth of free thought.
yeah.
So,
Yeah,
you
sure.
lived in Moscow in 2014?
Yeah, so it was February to, I was there first time in 2004 actually, and then in 2014, February to April.
What was
Yeah.
that experience like, working so closely with civil society groups that might be under a lot of investigation or disabled by the government?
Yeah, so it was interesting, and also the fact that what was happening in Ukraine, they had like Maidan revolution in Ukraine at the same time and annexation of Crimea. So I actually was telling this to Kevin that I got email when I came, and I was working for NGO based in US and Russia, but I still don't know what the roots of the NGO really are. And I was also not given any instructions about what I should do with my time in Moscow, so it was kind of strange to me. But I I got the email saying that all your communications are property of Russian government. So basically, and then I was getting also emails with like, be careful to go to crowded spaces, don't go. So I was like very careful. And I was also trying to go with my colleagues who know what's going on at least, because it can be very, very confusing experience. And I speak fluent Russian, and the streets in Moscow, for example, like orientation, architecture of the city, they're so difficult to orient yourself in, unless you were born there.
Yeah, it's not very good.
And St. Petersburg even worse because they have like building behind building behind building, and then there are and it's interesting because I started thinking about the architecture of mind, and I grew up in New York City, so it's like blocks everywhere, and like it's some are more difficult streets to navigate, like around Chinatown, or like they're not like perpendicular or parallel. But in Moscow, all streets are like that. It's like if you get lost, and then people assume if you speak Russian, you know where you're going. So they don't really like to give a lot of instructions. So I would find myself lost many, many times. And it was interesting to just live and get experience of what happens if you break your computer or you have to get a cell phone. And turns out there are different prices for the cell phone because they kind of feel like you're not from around here, which is interesting because I also happen to travel to India a lot. So I would say nothing is what it seems, nothing is as simple as it seems, not as straightforward. So you have to figure things out, and it kind of makes your mind work and realize what do I do? But with danger-wise, I didn't really feel I was specifically in danger because I guess what was helping is that I had American passport. But I met activists from England, I think, who were being actually to some extent kind of silly because they were provoking Russian police sometimes. And there was this one lady who would end up in prison again and again because she was provoking Russian police, and she was making fun of them. And a few times, but I guess she knew that nothing is going to happen to her, so she was kind of playing, and they maybe understood that she's playing too. And also with this study, I also didn't want to say this is what's happening in Russia, and this is so horrible, and this is look at, these adaptations of this technology are happening in different parts of the world.
And many
I
of
was
them are
exposed.
happening here.
Yeah,
It's not a
everywhere.
uniquely
In
Russian
India,
phenomenon.
it's interesting to look at the culturally speaking, and I happen to be in Italy. I would think EU is so advanced in protection of human rights and privacy rights, but it was during COVID times, and they had to take our temperature, and without our permission, they were not asking for it. I could see that because of the square, they were taking photo of my face too. And I'm maybe they apply different laws to me because I'm not a EU citizen, but still I would think they would say something, or just under pretext of taking temperature. They also just in case took a photo of my face too. So it's kind of how it's happening. That's what's interesting to look at, like for me. And because I happen to speak the language and I happen to have traveled there, it was interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you see any evidence that the way that the Chinese have coupled surveillance technology and the generation of social credit scores, by which the ability of people to go about their business and buy things, to some extent as a function of how they are scored? Is there something like this being built in Russia?
So what comes to mind is this kind of, I'm thinking about like the shaming kind of in public, which like I remember was present in Soviet Union schools, for example, because I was in Soviet Union school for some time. And I remember that was like my shock that in the US, like the teacher could not tell you like get up, you didn't do homework, or your homework is sloppy in front of everybody. In USSR it was happening quite often. So this like idea of shaming, and I don't know much about the credit the system in China, but I understand that like if you're crossing the street at the wrong time, they will shame you. They might put your image on the big screen in the neighborhood where you live. Like that's what I read somewhere.
They do that in China.
And it kind of has psychological effect on the person, and also to prevent them from doing this. I don't think this is happening in Russia now, but with these post-factum detentions, they can come to your workplace, and that has a dampening effect because people you work with see you being taken away by the police. And that definitely affects your reputation, even so it might not be the case that you are a villain in this case, but how are you going to prove it? And the interesting part is also about the biases of the AI technology. They happen in the US, and Kashmir Hill was writing about it, specifically for example, African-American men being detained wrongfully with the help of the AI, of facial recognition, and then the police would find, some very wrong decisions were made alongside. So it was not technology, it was how humans, police in this case, were using it. It happened in Russia, even so most men are white, the white men were detained, nobody apologized to them, and they had to prove that they are not actually the people in their algorithm. So it was burden on them. So it's interesting how this works.
Well, yeah, speaking of, the technology both getting it wrong, but also the human being in the loop just blindly trusting the tech. There was recently an incident I learned about that, it was in Houston actually, that somebody, there was a robbery or something, and the police were investigating it as normal, but the company had partnered with a facial recognition AI camera system, and the company went through the system, and they basically told the police, stop your investigation, we got the guy. The system has a match, basically. Of course, it turned out the system was wrong because the dude in question wasn't even in Houston at the time. He was away in California on a business trip, so there was no way he could have done the robbery. And he they arrested him though when he came back, even though it wasn't the guy. He was stuck, I want to say he was stuck in jail for almost a month before everybody finally admitted they made a mistake. Of course, after that, on the literal day he was to be let out, he was followed to the bathroom and sexually assaulted. So these mistakes, hurt real innocent people in irreversible ways because people blindly trusted that tech could not possibly have made a mistake.
Yeah.
If a tow truck is speeding, you're going to get a ticket, not the tow truck, because your license plate is behind.
It's kind of interesting how sometimes even the human in the loop, I think, can make it worse. There was a pilot study which was actually with the subway system, and with the facial recognition plus human review, they didn't successfully identify anybody with accuracy. 0% accuracy rate for that particular test.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I will just flag that we are within 10 minutes of where we have to vacate the room, so I will say if anybody has one or two final questions, let's do them, but just warning everybody we do need to wrap up here very shortly.
Yeah, what they are always saying, these companies, that they are developing it and improving it, specifically AI, Clearview AI that they own over 30, they scraped 30 billion images, and the Russian NTech lab, they also say that we can read millions in 1 second, millions faces. So it's constantly is being improved.
I have a question. You said you grew up in New York.
Yeah, I grew up in New York.
Do you see any parallels, or how would you compare facial recognition in New York City compared to in Moscow?
So, I know nothing, like really nothing about like facial recognition. I kind of try to look at like where are the cameras, like I see some like traffic cameras, but what I know, it's one of the most dense. I think Atlanta is the most dense with facial recognition cameras, like concentration.
I think that's a lot of what the so-called cop city protests in Atlanta are about, an immense amount of recognition.
Yeah, and I know that Moscow is like 2 cities behind or something, because there was a study also done with like most cities like Chennai in India, Delhi in China, some of the biggest cities, that's the biggest, like density of those cameras. But again, it depends on like what is the population, like what is the square footage of the city. New York is one of the biggest. But there was a very interesting report written by the Georgetown Law about facial recognition uses in the US by the law enforcement. And it's a very big report. I forgot what the name was. It was an interesting name.
But Georgetown Law put it out.
Yeah, Georgetown Law Center. Yeah, I just saw it. Yeah, actually, I took a quote from them that facial recognition cameras are too powerful to be secret. That was a quote from that report. But they studied specifically the case here in the US. And another organization wrote basically letters to different police departments all over the country to ask, are you using facial recognition cameras? Like how many, how are you using them? And most of them did not even reply. Some replied, but very abstractly speaking. So it's not that transparent.
And I mean, that was even one thing I was pushing our city leaders about, where I was just like, look, I know not everybody on council or city government's going to see eye to eye with me on this, but bare minimum, if you're going to have these systems, you at least need to have transparency of there is some very prominent sign saying, yes, this system is here in this public place, you should be aware of it.
So, any public protest should be a Klondike for face painting artists. Why aren't there?
Yeah.
I saw a bunch of makeup patterns, especially from Russia, that would allow you to trick the face recognition anyway. But anecdotic evidence aside, here's an unpopular opinion. So what you're saying is that the knowledge is power and yada yada yada, but the power is not the knowledge, but the exclusivity of the knowledge. They're collecting the data, they're not sharing the data. If the state is collecting the data, there is a view that, okay, the state has collected the data, these are taxes. That data shall be made public and readily available to anyone. Because I can go and get any state camera or state of Texas camera under the Freedom of Information Act. I won't even pay a dime to the police department where those cameras are installed. And then the whole power is vanishes. I can go and get all the data. So, because, we live in a society, we know who's doing what. And back in time, it was exactly like that. When you're in a dense crowd, you see what's facial recognition, who is wearing. So,
I certainly would say that one of the big factors is the lack of transparency, and that in and of itself creates a lot of the power asymmetry. Like the big issue with data brokers is just, where is our data going? Who's buying it? For what? There is no transparency. Anyway, we are basically need to make it.
Great talk.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much for speaking. That was really quite fascinating and phenomenal. And thank you all for, as always, vigorous discussion with many points of view. We appreciate it. If anybody parked in the garage and needs parking validation, we will all probably, anybody who can stick around, will go get
somewhat depressing presentation information that was somewhat depressing.
Thank you.
Got your information. Why are you primarily planning anything coming up in South by Southwest next month?
No, yes. Like I need to look at it. See, like I've lived in Austin for 3 years. And
Okay, so you're living here in Austin.
I love live music, but I haven't gotten a chance to check it out myself. So I actually do want to explore it. I want to go because I do like live concerts, and it's a famous festival. I know, like Austin is capital of live music of the world.
Well, it depends. Mostly downtown.
Depends what you like.
Yeah, it also depends on the timing. So we're vacating.
Yeah, I still have some time. I think there is like an after-hour place where you can go, right?
I don't
That's
know.
what Kevin was
I
saying,
was invited here by someone.
Well,
I don't even know the name of the meetup.
Came, because I was like, this is like very specific kind of topic
Sure.
in
Well,
Russia and facial recognition cameras,
well, here's my info.
Oh, thank you.
Of course, my question would have been, okay, so what's to prevent someone like me from just hacking all these cameras and using their own information?
Well, nothing,
Collecting
just
it.
don't say it too loudly, you know, because the walls are listening. Nothing.
Anyway, so.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I doubt any of them are updating the firmware on these cameras.
Yeah, well, it's,
Yep. I don't know who's back at it over there. Somebody's,
Oh, yeah, somebody's coming back with this.
oh,
Yeah.
I don't recall who was there in that seat.
Yeah, but we should always something about that.
I'll say something. Does that make sense? It's like safety in numbers. I'll do it. You go first.
Yeah, I really do. I was just, you know, in my mind, I was like, oh, that's cool. You're really cool. Even when you enter the room with the
With my drinks, you're like, whoa, I want that. And yes, I was right then.
Exactly.
I think they got all my, yep, they did, okay.
Yeah.
So,
That's the advantage of being with friends. They
Yes.
take care of your
totally
stuff.